Vivid verses.
I've always been good at reading maps. Not just the paper kind, the kind people draw with their behavior, their hesitations, the small corrections they make when they think you're not watching. My father used to say that a man who understands geography understands people, because both reveal themselves most honestly through where they actually go, not where they claim they're headed. I thought about that a lot in the months before I ended things with Priya. My name is Callum Reed, and I work as a risk analyst for a mid-sized infrastructure consultancy called Harrow and Vance, headquartered in a glass tower on Ferris Boulevard in the fictional city of Calderton. We assess bridges, tunnels, urban drainage systems, anything load-bearing, anything that promises to hold. There's an obvious irony there that I didn't appreciate until much later. I'm 34. I own a clean apartment in the Whitmore district, keep a disciplined morning routine, and have a small group of friends I've known since university. I'm not a monk. I've had relationships, some serious, but I've never been the kind of man who confuses intensity with substance. I like things that are real, provable, things that show up when they're supposed to. Priya Anand came in my life at a dinner party hosted by my colleague and friend, Owen Marsh. Owen throws these quarterly gatherings at his place near the Caldertown Botanical Gardens. 8 to 12 people, good wine, the kind of conversation that actually goes somewhere. He has a gift for assembling interesting rooms. The night I met Priya, the room was particularly good. She was sitting at the far end of Owen's long oak table, talking to a ceramic sculptor named Finn about the structural properties of unfired clay. I remember catching fragments of the conversation and being quietly impressed that she was holding her own on a technical subject with someone who clearly lived inside it. Priya was a brand strategist at a firm called Linden & Company, but she read widely and argued with precision. She was warm without being indiscriminate about it. She laughed genuinely. We spoke for about 40 minutes over dessert. By the time Owen's partner brought out the cheese board, I'd already decided I wanted to see her again. We exchanged numbers. I texted 2 days later, not playing at timelines, just when it felt natural. She responded within the hour. We met for coffee that Saturday at a place called Bower and Grounds on Trent Street, a narrow espresso bar with exposed brickwork and exactly 6 stools. We stayed for 2.5 hours. We talked about her childhood in Bangalore, my father's cartography obsession, the specific anxiety of caring about your work in an industry that doesn't always reward care. By the 3rd date, I knew I wanted to pursue this seriously. By the 6th, I told her as much. She matched it, said she'd been hoping I felt that way, said she could see something real here. I took her at her word. That was not naivety. It was a reasonable interpretation of clear, repeated signals. What followed required about 7 months to fully understand. Priya was, in every measurable way, an exceptional partner during those first few months. She remembered things, small things, the name of the bridge project that was stressing me out, my preference for apogee coffee over the more fashionable Velt roasts, the fact that I found most birthday celebrations slightly exhausting. She came to meet my friends at Owen's next quarterly dinner, and she held the room effortlessly. My friend Sasha, who is constitutionally suspicious of new romantic partners, pulled me into Owen's kitchen halfway through the evening and said, "All right, she's good." From Sasha, that was practically a standing ovation. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. Weekends together, usually in my place since her flatmate situation was, as she described it, temporary and chaotic. We cooked, watched films, took long walks through the Calderton Embankment District on Sunday mornings. It felt like the foundations of something solid. Then, around month 4, Priya started talking about the future. Not in a pressured way, not the kind of thing that puts you on guard. More like she was narrating a world she could already see and inviting me into the vision. She talked about a trip to Porto we should take in the spring. She'd been twice before and wanted to show me her favorite restaurant near the river. She mentioned casually but clearly, that her lease was up in 3 months and that she'd been looking at neighborhoods where she might want to settle long term. She talked about wanting me to meet her parents, who visited from Bangalore once a year and were due in the autumn. She mentioned twice a friend's wedding in Edinburgh the following summer, asking whether I'd want to come as her guest. I'm not a man who fears commitment. When she raised these things, I met them with genuine openness. Porto sounded wonderful. I said so, and asked if we should look at flights. She smiled and said yes, definitely, maybe in the next few weeks. The neighborhood question led to a good conversation about which districts in Calderton had the best combination of space and access. The parents, I said I'd look forward to it. I was present. I was willing. I was paying attention. And then nothing happened. Not dramatically. Not with a scene or an argument. The Porto trip just never graduated from conversation to calendar. Every time I moved toward the practical step, let's actually look at dates, something dissolved the momentum. She was busy with a campaign launch. The timing wasn't right. She'd heard some friends had gone recently and found it very touristy now. So, maybe somewhere else? We never decided on somewhere else. The lease came and went. Her flatmate situation remained temporary and chaotic. When I asked how the search was going, she mentioned she'd looked at a few places, but nothing had felt right. She was thinking of taking her time. I didn't push. It wasn't my decision. Her parents visited in the autumn. I knew they were coming. She'd mentioned it in August. I waited to see when she'd arrange for us to meet. She mentioned their visit several times during those 2 weeks. I never appeared in it. When her parents left, she said it had been a lovely visit. She'd missed them. Her mother had opinions about everything. She did not explain why I hadn't met them. I noted that. Filed it. The Edinburgh wedding was mentioned again in late autumn, this time with more detail. The venue, the dress code, how long the train journey was. I said it sounded like a great weekend. She agreed. I waited for the next step. The next step didn't arrive. None of this, individually, would be worth diagnosing. People get busy. Plans fall through. Life has friction. I know this. I am not a man who demands perfection from a relationship or treats every rescheduled dinner as an omen. But I'm a risk analyst. I work with patterns. I know the difference between noise and signal. The pattern here was clean. Once I let myself see it, the future was inexhaustible. There was always another trip to propose, another milestone on the horizon, another piece of scaffolding erected around a building that was never actually being constructed. The enthusiasm was real. That was the complicated part. She wasn't performing excitement about Porto or the Edinburgh wedding. She meant it when she said it. But meaning it and doing it were, for Priya, 2 entirely separate categories. The future was a room she loved to describe. She just never walked into it. I spent about 3 weeks in November sitting with this because I believe in being thorough before I act. I wanted to be sure I wasn't being ungenerous. I wanted to be sure I wasn't confusing her pace with her intent. I considered that some people are dreamers, that the talking is the pleasure for them, and the execution is secondary. I have some tolerance for that. But I also knew what I was looking for in a relationship. I was 34 years old. I wanted something that moved. Not frantically, not on a timeline someone else handed me, but moved. Forward. With intention. What I had with Priya was sophisticated stasis dressed in the language of progress. That's a specific thing. It requires a specific response. The crystallizing moment came in late November at a small birthday dinner for our mutual friend Cass, held at a restaurant called Farlow's on the south side of Calderton, a low-lit Italian place with banquettes and walls covered in old Calderton street maps. I'd been to Farlow's a dozen times. I noticed Priya looking at the maps when we arrived, and she said something about how she loved the idea of maps as decoration, how they made a space feel like it had a story. I thought of my father. I almost said something. There were 8 of us at the table. Good company, Cass and her partner Remy, Owen and his partner Tilda, Sasha and her husband Bram, me and Priya. The kind of evening that flows well, where the wine gets poured generously and nobody checks their phone. About an hour in, the conversation turned, as it often does with this particular group, toward upcoming plans. Someone asked about the holidays. Remy mentioned they were going to visit his family in Lisbon. Owen and Tilda had rented a cottage in the north for 2 weeks in January. Then Priya looked at me across the table and said, "We still haven't booked Porto, have we? We should really do that. January would actually be perfect." She said it with full warmth and zero irony. She looked genuinely enthused. Sasha, across the table, looked at me with an expression I recognized. She'd heard me mention the Porto thing before in passing, and she was watching to see how I'd respond. I smiled. "You're right," I said. "Let's pick a date this week." "Yes, definitely," Priya said, already turning back to the table. "We'll sort it." The conversation moved on, but I had already done the math. This was the 4th time Porto had appeared in conversation and retreated from it. Not because I'd been unwilling, not because logistics were actually prohibitive, because forward motion, when it came from me, was always absorbed into some vague near future where things would definitely happen. I was familiar with how that future looked. I'd been living in it for 7 months. Sasha caught my eye briefly, then looked at her wine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I gave it 2 more weeks after Farlow's. Not out of doubt. I was passed out, but out of fairness. I wanted to extend every reasonable benefit before I acted. On the Monday, after the dinner, I mentioned Porto while we were cooking in my apartment. Casual, practical. I had a look at flights for late January. There are some good options on the 14th or the 21st. Which appeals? She was chopping bell peppers. She made a small sound of consideration. The 21st might be tight. I think there's something happening with the Linden account that week. Can we check closer to the time? Sure, I said. I wrote it down internally. The following Sunday, I raised it again. The January flights are filling up. Should we go for February instead? February could work, she said. Actually, I was thinking, would you want to do Barcelona instead? I've been hearing so much about it lately. Porto had just become Barcelona. I didn't react. I said Barcelona sounded interesting and we could think about it. I noted, with precision, that the destination had shifted. The actual booking had not gotten any closer. The second week I tried something different. Rather than raising a future plan, I made a concrete move. I found 2 return flights to Porto on the first weekend in March. A reasonable distance out, low-pressure timing, fair prices. I sent her the link. Not a demand, just, "These look good if you want to have a look." She responded 3 hours later. "Oh, nice. Let me just check some things with work, and I'll get back to you." She did not get back to me. Not that day, not the next. I didn't follow up. I wanted to see what happened when I stopped providing the gravitational pull. What happened was nothing. The flights went from available to sold out over the following 10 days. She didn't mention Porto again. I sat with what I now knew with absolute clarity. She would talk about the future indefinitely. She would not enter it. Every concrete step I took toward the goals she had proposed would be absorbed, deflected, or replaced with a new goal further down the road. It was a very elegant system, whether or not she was running it consciously. The carrot retreated at exactly the pace I advanced. I spent one evening, being honest with myself about whether there was a version of this I was misreading, whether she had anxiety about change or commitment fears that were worth having a direct conversation about. I considered whether I was being too results-oriented, whether I was missing something emotional underneath the pattern. Here's what I concluded. Even if there was a fear or a wound underneath it, it had been expressed entirely through behavior that consumed my time and expectations without return. And she had never once named it. Never said, "I know, I keep proposing things I don't follow through on." I'm working on understanding that. There is no self-awareness in the loop, no invitation to address it together. There is only the next vision of the future, offered with complete sincerity, disappearing on contact with reality. That mattered. I could work with honesty. I couldn't work with a pattern someone didn't acknowledge they were running. I made my decision. I chose the how, and when with the same care I'd given the what. I asked her to come over on a Friday evening, the second week of December. I didn't frame it as anything significant, just that I'd made dinner and wanted to spend some time together. She arrived at 7, in good spirits, carrying a bottle of Calabrese Red she'd picked up at a place on Voss Lane called the Bottle Room. She was wearing a dark green coat I hadn't seen before. She looked well. I had made pasta, linguine with a clam sauce, one of the few things I do well. We ate at the kitchen table rather than the living room, which is my preference for real conversations. The dinner was genuinely pleasant. We talked about her week, a difficult client she'd navigated, a piece of interesting work I was doing on a rail overpass assessment. It wasn't strained. I didn't want it to be. After we cleared the plates, I made coffee. She settled on the couch. I brought the cups over, sat down at an angle to her rather than directly beside her. Not aggressively, just positioned for a direct conversation, and let a brief natural pause open up. Then I said, I want to talk to you about something. And I want to be straightforward about it because you deserve that. She looked at me, something shifting slightly in her expression. Not alarm, but attentiveness. She knew my register. She knew I wasn't given a preamble. Okay, she said. I've been thinking about us, I said. About the last 7 months. I think we've had a genuinely good run. I've valued a lot of it. But I've been sitting with something, and I've taken enough time with it to be sure of what I'm seeing. I didn't rush. I didn't load my voice with emotion or accusation. I've found that when you speak the truth calmly, it carries further. You talk about our future with real enthusiasm, I said. Porto, Barcelona, meeting your parents, Edinburgh, living together, eventually. You raise these things, most of them, you raise them first, and I meet them with genuine willingness. Every time I've moved toward the practical step, something stops it, and then a new vision appears a little further out. She opened her mouth. I held up one hand, not a silencing gesture, just a signal that I wasn't finished. She paused. I've tested this, I said. Not as a game, because I want to be fair to you. I sent you the Porto flights 3 weeks ago. You said you'd get back to me. You didn't. I didn't follow up because I wanted to see what happened when I stopped being the one sustaining the momentum. The flight sold out. You haven't mentioned it since. The room was quiet. Outside, the Whitmore district was doing its usual Friday evening things. A tram running on Barrow Street, someone's music faint through the window, the ordinary sounds of the city not paying any attention to what was happening in my apartment. Cal, she started. Let me finish, I said. I'm not angry. I want you to hear that. I'm not angry with you, and this isn't an attack. I'm telling you what I see because you deserve a clear account of why I'm arriving where I'm arriving. She settled back slightly. Her expression had moved through several things, surprise, a flicker of defensiveness, and had landed somewhere more considered. I gave her that. I kept my voice even. You sell futures you never intend to deliver, I said. I'm no longer buying. Something crossed her face at that. A wince, I think. A small one. Not because it was cruel, but because it was exact. There are things that land not because they're harsh, but because they're true in a way that can't be walked back from. That's not fair, she said quietly. It's not like I'm doing this deliberately. I know, I said. I genuinely believe you're not. The sincerity is real. But the effect is the same whether the intent is there or not. 7 months in, we have not taken a single concrete step toward any of the things you've described wanting with me. That's not bad luck or bad timing. That's a pattern. Things come up, she said. Work, The lease situation, my parents' visit was complicated. Priya, I said, gently but directly, I sent you a link to 2 flights. You said you'd look at it. You didn't look at it. There was no work complication that week. There was nothing in the way. It just didn't happen, and you didn't mention it again. I paused. I'm not cataloging this to win a point. I'm telling you that I've done the work of being sure. I didn't want to arrive here on an instinct. I wanted to arrive here knowing. She was quiet for a moment. I watched her, not looking for something to respond to, just present. There was something in her expression that looked like recognition. Not quite admission, but the cousin of it. So what are you saying? She asked. I'm saying this is the end of us, I said. Not because I don't care about you. I do, genuinely. But I'm 34 years old and I know what I want. I want something that moves. I want someone who does the thing, not just imagines it. What we have is a very good story about a relationship we're not actually having. That's not true, she said, and her voice had shifted, warmed slightly, taken on the particular tone she used when she wanted to draw me back in. I'd heard it before. I'd found it persuasive before. We have something real. You know we do. I know I've been distracted. I know Porto fell through. Porto didn't fall through, I said. Porto was never started. She stopped. I want to be clear about one more thing, I said, keeping my voice steady, watching her. I know what you're doing right now isn't cynical. I don't think you sat down and decided to keep me in place with promises. But knowing it's not cynical doesn't mean I can keep investing in it. I need to be honest with myself the same way I've tried to be honest with you. She looked at me for a long moment. I didn't look away. I've learned that composure unsettles people more than force does. Not because it's a tactic, but because most people expect emotion to meet emotion, and when it doesn't, they're left alone in theirs. I don't want this to end, she said finally. I know, I said. Is there nothing? She stopped, reformulated. What would change this? I considered that. I wanted to answer it honestly, not dismissively. If you'd had this conversation with me at any point in the last few months, I said, if you'd said, I keep proposing things I don't follow through on, I'm aware of that. I'm trying to understand it. I'd have sat with you in that. I can work with honesty. But this pattern hasn't been named or acknowledged until right now, when I've named it. That matters to me. She looked at her coffee cup. I thought, and I still think, that somewhere in her, she recognized what I was describing. She's perceptive. She would have known, on some level, that the gap between her words and her actions was real. But knowing it internally and offering it into a conversation are different things, and she hadn't made that offering. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I think maybe you're right that I do this. I received that without using it. It wasn't the moment for analysis. Thank you for saying that, I said. We sat for another few minutes. The coffee got cold. She didn't cry, which I respected. There was a dignity to how she held it. Once the initial resistance passed, she asked a few gentle questions, whether I'd thought about this for a long time, whether there had been a particular moment. I answered honestly. I told her about Farlow's, about the map walls, about watching her propose Porto for the 4th time with genuine enthusiasm. I didn't say it bitterly. I said it the way you describe a thing you found both beautiful and sad. She left around 9. I walked her to the door. She paused on the threshold and said, I do think you're one of the good ones, Cal. I think you are too, I said. And I meant it. She just wasn't good for me in the specific way that mattered. After she left, I washed the pasta dishes, wiped down the kitchen counter, and stood at the window looking at the Whitmore district lights for a few minutes. Not with sadness exactly, more with the particular quiet that follows a decision that has been a long time coming. The kind of quiet that has weight to it, but not the heavy kind. The kind that means you did the right thing at the right speed. The weeks after were straightforward, as these things go. Priya sent me one message. For days later, a long one, thoughtful, acknowledging more of what I'd said than I'd expected. She said she'd spoken to a friend and done some reflection, and she thought I was right that she had a pattern of proposing futures she didn't enter. She said she wasn't sure why, but she thought it was worth understanding. She wasn't asking me to reconsider. She was, I think, genuinely working through something, and she wanted me to know it. I replied briefly and warmly. I said I was glad she was sitting with it, and that I hoped she'd find her way through. I meant that too. I don't carry resentment. It's not efficient, and it's not fair. What she'd done wasn't malicious. It was a habit of feeling, probably with roots I never got to see. The fact that it had cost me 7 months was worth acknowledging. The fact that she was a person navigating her own complications was also worth acknowledging. Both things sat in the space without needing to cancel each other out. I had dinner with Owen and Tilda the following week. I told them what had happened briefly. Owen poured another glass of Rioja without ceremony and said he thought I'd handled it well. Tilda said she'd always liked Priya but could see what I was describing. We talked about it for about 10 minutes and then moved on to the rail overpass, which was genuinely interesting. I ran into Sasha at a gallery opening in the Kessler building the week after that. A photography show about Calderton's industrial history, full of black and white images of the old Docklands. She saw me across the room and came over, and before I'd said anything, she said, "The Porto thing." I laughed. "The Porto thing. I watched you at Farlow's," she said. "I saw you clock it in real time. I've never seen anyone so calm while being handed carrot." "I wasn't completely calm," I said. "You were 200% calm," she said. It was slightly alarming. We looked at a photograph of the old Calderton ferry terminal, a long timber structure half sunk into fog, its pilings still standing though the boards between them were gone. I thought it was a good image. Structure without substance. The bones of a plan nobody finished. "Are you all right, genuinely?" Sasha asked. "Yes," I said, and I was. I made it mean less than it might have by seeing it clearly. Ambiguity is where feelings compound. Once I understood the pattern, the emotional arithmetic was simpler. She considered this. "That might be the most you thing you've ever said." "I'll take that." In January, I booked a trip to Porto. Not as a statement, not with any symbolic weight attached, simply because it had genuinely been on my list for a while, independent of Priya, and there was no reason to let someone else's unfulfilled plans make me avoid something I wanted. I went solo for 4 days, staying at a small guest house called Quinta Velha in the Bonfim district. I ate well, walked along the Douro, visited the Livraria Portuguesa bookshop, and spent 2 hours in it, bought a small section of reproduced historical map from a vendor near the cathedral. The city was good. It was exactly the kind of place where you can think clearly without feeling like you're forcing it. I sat on a stone wall on the last afternoon, looking at the tiled rooftops descending toward the river, and I thought about what I wanted the next phase of my life to look like. Not in an anxious way, just in the way you review a map before you set out. I wanted what I'd always wanted. Someone present. Someone who moves toward things, not just describes them. Someone whose word is the same shape as their action. That's not a complicated list, but it's a precise one, and precision is worth defending. I took a photograph of the rooftops. When I got back to Calderton, I had it printed and framed. It hangs in my hallway now, next to a small map my father made of the county where he grew up, hand-drawn, pencil and ink, showing every road and every river with equal care. 2 maps, both real, both honest about where they go. I look at them every morning on my way out the door. I find them clarifying. My father used to say that a good map tells you 3 things: where you are, where you've been, and where the road actually leads, not where you wish it would go. He said people get lost not because they can't read maps, but because they keep reading the one they wish were true instead of the one in their hands. I spent 7 months reading the wrong map. I forgive myself for that. It was a good-looking map, well drawn, with beautiful destinations. But I caught the error while I still had time to correct course, and I corrected it without drama, without bitterness, without becoming someone I didn't want to be. That's the work. Seeing clearly, acting accordingly, not confusing the journey someone describes with the journey they're actually willing to take. Priya was many things I admired. She just wasn't going where she said she was going. And I've always needed to move.
Thanks for listening.